Tonight. 2010 U.S. Senate candidate David Malpass is staying involved in politics ahead of the 2012 elections. He had hoped to unseat Kirsten Gillibrand, but he did not make it past the Republican primary last year. Now he's serving as an economic advisor to Texas Governor and presidential hopeful Rick Perry. That includes helping Perry develop his 20% flat tax proposal, just came out. Here with us now to talk more about the Perry campaign, also his own future plans, hopefully, is David Malpass. David, it is good to see you again.
Hi, Liz. Good to see you.
So Rick Perry, not a New York guy. Mitt Romney's closer. He's like right next door. So how did you and Rick Perry come to connect?
You know, I've been looking for a candidate who will cause an upheaval in Washington. So the Perry campaign said, can I help with the tax plan? You know, I was heavily involved in the '86 Tax Act in the Reagan administration when the rates were brought down and the code was simplified and the base was broadened. And it worked very well. And so I said, sure, I'm eager to help. I'm pleased with Perry's view that you have to have sweeping change. That's what I'd like to see in Washington.
Yeah, you know, it's unfortunate for him, actually, because a lot of people were interested in this flat tax proposal, but then it sort of got overshadowed when he brought up the issue again of Barack Obama's birth certificate, and he has since then repudiated the questioning of whether or not it was actually real. I mean, the big criticism of Rick Perry is that he's been a little gaffe prone. What is your feeling about that? Can he clean himself up in time for this to sort of go away for him?
I hope so. I'd like to see the clear focus on jobs and growth. He's got a great record in Texas. You know, in Texas politics, my impression is that they move around a lot. They say a lot of things. And from my point of view, someone has to go into Washington with a few rough edges, because you're going to, you're going to bump elbows, and more than that, it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight to try to slow down the growth in Washington.
Well, that's interesting. The problem is that whereas your rough edges might be helpful when you get there, the press is going to eviscerate you on the way there, and you may not make it because of that process, right? I mean, you remember what it was like, and you just ran in New York. You didn't run nationally.
That's right. We'll see how it affects the public impression of him, the fundraising. I think if you can keep bringing the issue back to that Washington's out of control on spending and taxes and regulation, and he's the guy to change that, that would be a good message, and it might work.
So explain to us then in layperson's terms, and I know you're an economist, so forgive me, but you need to bring it down a little bit. The difference between the 20% flat tax proposal that Rick Perry has put forward and the 999 plan that Herman Cain has gotten so much press for.
The 20% flat tax rate is kind of like what Reagan did. He had a 28% top marginal rate, and that was a big reduction from the 1970s, and it worked better. So it's a type of tax code that people are familiar with, just simpler. Whereas the 999 plan is quite different. It would impose a federal sales tax. So you know, in New York State we pay 8% and over 8% of on each sale, and this would piggyback another 9% on that. And Herman Cain says it's on the way to a value added. Well, they call it a fair tax,
right,
which is really just a hidden sales tax, I would call it. And so I've worked 20 years, 25 years trying to get countries not to do that in Europe, in Latin America, under the thumb of the IMF. The sales tax at the federal level is very hard to make it work, because it hits poor people the most, because they consume the biggest percentage of their income. So I prefer a flat tax myself.
Yeah, my understanding is that there was a lot of criticism of Herman Cain, because when various different think tanks ran the numbers, they found that low-income folks actually would get hit quite hard by the 999 plan. He subsequently then tweaked it some and said, well, low-income areas will be able to opt out, etc. There's also an option in the Perry plan, as I understand it, that people could either opt in or not if they want to remain where they are now. Do I have that right?
That's right. That avoids the criticism that someone may like the code the way it is. There are a few people who actually like it because they've organized their lives around loopholes and deductions. So if they want to stay there, they can. But most of the country would like to have a flatter, a lower rate tax. I should point out, clearly there's going to be heavy criticism of any new proposal. Washington is really wedded to a complex code. And so all of Washington's knives are going to come out at the flat tax, as they did with Steve Forbes when he proposed it in 1996.
Would this also continue to enable people to write off things like their mortgage, the interest on their mortgage? Because I know that's also something that some folks have suggested, that we have to do away with so many write-offs in the tax code.
That's right. It would do away with a lot of the loopholes, but it would preserve the deduction for mortgage interest, state and local taxes, which is really important in New York State because our tax rates are so high,
right.
And also for charitable deductions. So from that standpoint, those three big ones are preserved. They are phased out for incomes above $500,000. So it creates, I think, a tax code that would work better than what we've got now.
And just to be clear, though, I mean, since in '86, when you were talking about things getting broadened under Reagan, I mean, it hasn't gotten any easier since then. It's gotten only increasingly more complicated, but revenue has also increased. Are you sure that this is going to work at a time when the nation is in a debt crisis, on again and off again, depending on what day it is in D.C.?
You know, nothing's really sure. What we know is that the country's in this very deep fiscal hole, and it's getting worse every month. So our fiscal deficit this year was bigger than last year, even though they say they're trying to cut back. So no, I can't be sure of anything. But what we did see after 1986 the tax change was a big jump in a lot of revenues. That tax change was supposed to allow people to go fishing. There was a famous phrase in Washington, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, a Democrat who worked on that tax change, hung out a sign saying "Gone fishing." But then very quickly Washington took over and gummed it all up again.
You know, what about the rest of the field? Did you actually meet with the rest of the field? For example, Mitt Romney's out there. You've also got Jon Huntsman, of course. I mean, also, you know, Michelle Bachmann. Do you not consider her viable, or are these other folks viable? Because mostly at this point, people seem to be playing it like Mitt versus Kaine versus Perry. But there's other people out there. Newt Gingrich is out there, too, last I checked.
Well, I've met 4 of the ones that you named there, and I think they're all viable. The question is, the country is desperately trying to get change that will allow more job creation. So I think quite a few of the Republicans could do that, and so I'd be happy to see them fight it out in this primary process. You know, I didn't like a primary process myself because it's very expensive.
It is.
So one of the issues for all these candidates is how long can they stay in the race and how's their fundraising going. So it's unfortunate, but that's the way our system works.
Yeah, and also it just seems like the Republicans keep falling in and out of love with someone every other week, and yet Barack Obama's numbers aren't that great. If you could only just settle on someone, then maybe perhaps you would have a better chance. But instead there's all this infighting while he just raises incredible amounts of money.
Yes, and that's a negative, and I'm afraid it's going to go on right into the primary. You know, New York State has a primary in April, and wouldn't it be amazing if New York becomes a player in the national race? Normally, it's decided earlier than that, and it probably will be this year.
Yeah, probably. I mean, certainly New York, Reagan carried New York twice, actually. So even though this is a Democrat-dominated state, a much different state since the 80s, though. Just looking forward, you ran, as I mentioned, against Kirsten Gillibrand. You have not a new PAC, you have a PAC called Grow PAC. You've been helping candidates across the state, a number of special election candidates in Congress, for example, some of them successful. What are you planning to do? Are you going to be returning to the public stage?
And we did. Well, I was happy to support Bob Turner in that special election.
Indeed.
And some of the ones in November 2010. Mostly what I'm doing is wanting to be involved in the issues. You know, I ran in 2010 because I was really concerned about the fiscal health of the country. I've got 4 young kids, and you heard about that. You know, when the government borrows with a 30-year bond, basically they're saying current politicians get to spend it, and your children get to pay for it. And that's very concerning. That's something that we've got to stop. So I'm involved in that. In New York State, we've got huge problems. You know, I was complimentary of Governor Cuomo in March and April, but I've wanted him to go farther, faster on the fiscal front in New York. I'm afraid we're getting this feeling that everything's great. In New York City, you know, it's in a boom. And yet upstate, it's very hard on the jobs front, on the economy front. And I'm afraid that Governor Cuomo hasn't gone far enough with pension reform, with the Triborough Amendment, which impedes the governance process, arbitrary mandatory arbitration on contracts is very costly for New York, and it's making it hard for small businesses and job growth here. So I'm concerned about the direction New York State is going as well.
Okay.
So I'm
David,
involved in those issues.
David, unfortunately, we're out of time. But what I have not heard is no, I will not run again. Do you want to say that or not?
No, I don't have to say that.
No, you do not. Okay, very, very good. We will be seeing you again then, I expect, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's been good to talk to you.
Okay, Liz, thanks.